Joining us now, MS Now White House reporter Laura Barrón-López, national security and political analyst Paul Rieckhoff, ProPublica reporter Jen Fifield, and former Trump White House attorney Ty Cobb. Laura, there's no clear indication of exactly what the president's going to outline tonight. You heard that preview from Caroline Leavitt saying it's going to be shocking. From your reporting, what do you expect?
Right. So from myself and my colleagues here at MS Now, like Vaughn Hilliard and David Rode, we've been told by White House officials as well as administration officials that the president is going to zero in on allegations of foreign interference, specifically in the 2020 election, and specifically when it comes to China, that the president is expected to declassify intel documents on China and whether or not they had ability or the intent to interfere in the 2020 election, and that he is going to use those intel documents to allege that Beijing compromised the U.S. 2020 election. Now, to be clear, the intel community in 2020 and 2021 looked into this and determined that there was no interference, no impact on vote tabulation, no hacking of critical election infrastructure by the Chinese. And that includes the president's own director of national intelligence at the time, John Rieckhoff, and that includes intel officials that worked for the president at the time.
So what about the pushback from some Trump allies who say it's time to stop looking in the rear view, start to look through the windshield, so to speak? How concerned is the White House about that pushback?
Well, even if there are people, and there are people inside the White House who don't necessarily think that this is what the president should be focused on at this time. They're very aware that gas prices are rising. The Iran war is not finished. But the people who don't necessarily want the president to be doing this aren't going to fight him on it because, as sources close to the White House told me, the president, this is what keeps him up at night, the 2020 election. This is what he is fixated on, and he has been fixated on, as everyone knows, for years, going on the better part of almost 7 years now. So this is something that the president is going to do, regardless of what others around him who may think this isn't the right time for this, we don't need to be relitigating 2020. He's going to still do it, especially when he has people like Bill Pulte, the acting DNI, in his ear, because Bill Pulte is someone, along with others, who are pushing the president to declassify this information, to have all intel documents out there, and to continue to peddle the 2020 conspiracy theories.
So as LBL just reiterated, the U.S. intelligence agencies concluded there was no foreign interference in 2020 that altered the outcome. There was some potential thumb on the scale from Russia and from Iran, but again, nothing that was considered to be tampering with voting records, nothing to be tampering with those who were voting. So no real impact on the outcome of the election. Trump lost the popular vote and the Electoral College. The experts that I've spoken to have said that they're concerned that he may cherry pick or pick out the intelligence that serves him. How big of a concern is that?
That's a huge concern. I think the bigger concern is this is the kind of speech that a president usually gives when they're going to war. And this is, I think, his formal declaration of war on the elections this fall. He's been setting the stage in a number of different ways. He's been moving the pieces to undermine the integrity of the upcoming elections. And he's going to use 2020 to look in the rearview mirror and to look forward to 2026. This is his chance to make a case that the 2026 election is rigged, shouldn't be trusted. And it's also, most of all, I think, about protecting his power. Wars are always about power. He knows that a free and fair fall election is the circuit breaker to hold him and this administration accountable. He's consistently telegraphed his punches. He said he's going to attack the elections. Tonight, I think, will be the formal declaration.
Is this a sign that President Trump is concerned about the possible outcomes of the midterm elections, or is this just him trying to relitigate the past? And as some sources close to him say, it's just personal vindication.
No, I think it's a strategic move. And I think we have to understand this has always been the strategy. Steve Bannon said that using ICE at the airports was practice for using ICE at the election booths this fall. He said that the 2020 election shouldn't be validated, shouldn't count. He's setting the stage to continue to make case throughout the summer to undermine the elections in the fall. He knows that right now, if the course continues, his party will lose in the fall. He will be held accountable. He could be impeached. The only thing that will slow him down right now is that circuit breaker of the fall elections, and that's why he's going to keep it his #1 priority above all else.
Ty, you've said that Donald Trump is stacking every card in the deck ahead of the midterms. What do you mean by that? How so?
Well, let's take a look. I mean, he has tried to eliminate mail-in voting. He's issued an executive order, which fortunately the courts have rejected. He's tried to have the post office refuse to send out ballots in red states who don't give over the voter rolls that 13 courts have said he's not entitled to under the Constitution. Steve Bannon and others have made plain. Todd Blanche have tried to season the electorate to expect to see troops on the street, ICE at the polls. I think it's important that people tonight, as they look at the podium surrounding the president, they should really look at it as a crib. This is a 2-year-old who lost his toy. The most grievous thing that ever happened to him was he lost an election. As a malignant narcissist, he just can't abide that. And he's going to fight it with every lie that he can to try to prevent those millions of people that Carolyn Leavitt says have concerns, notwithstanding the fact that 98% of the ballots in America cast in presidential elections are paper ballots. Soon it'll be 100% once Louisiana falls into line. And these are the safest elections ever. Todd Blanche, as I said, has given some lip service to election irregularities. Justice Department officials have as well. But keep in mind, Bill Barr said, Mr. President, there is no evidence of fraud. Bill Barr had access to the intelligence that the president is going to talk about tonight. So did John Ratcliffe, and we heard nothing at that stage of the game. Trump went 0 for 63 in election fraud claims in court. Many of his lawyers were subsequently disbarred, punished, lost huge judgments. Rudy Giuliani's been bankrupted, discredited. Fox News lost $800 million supporting the president's election fraud claims. These are going to be falsehood after falsehood. We'll hear about China on intelligence that existed at the time, and much of this intelligence, when intelligence comes in, it's graded. How credible could it possibly be? Much of the intelligence that the president is going to likely talk about tonight, was dismissed, and rightfully so. The only intelligence that's been verified about the 2020 election is the intelligence that showed that Russia tried to denigrate Biden and support Trump because, as we know, Russia's never had a better friend than Trump. So I think those are the facts that people need to keep in mind.
Ty, Trump's nominee to head DNI, Jay Clayton, seemed unable to fully acquiesce that he had lost the 2020 election. As you mentioned, Todd Blanche says he's giving the president some advice. He's not a yes man, though. Those were his words yesterday. You were once in Trump's inner orbit, in his inner circle. What differences do you see in Trump's circle now? He seems to be, to some degree, insulating himself or surrounding himself with people who are going to coddle this election denial.
Yes, I think it's sad that Jay Clayton, who was at one point a reputable lawyer and a good lawyer, highly regarded, he tried to run the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan independently, but he did give lip service to some of these election fraud claims. It's very sad. But yeah, I thought it was humiliating that he was unable to acknowledge that Trump lost the 2020 election by 7 million votes. So yes, I think this is too bad. It is a Justice Department theme now, and as of course we know, they've devoted resources, enormous resources, to this election fraud fantasy. They are illegally pursuing ballots across the country. They have seized ballots and initiated a long, expensive, pointless inquiry into the Georgia vote in 2020, where the only election interference that we're aware of is when Trump tried to extort from the Secretary of State Raffensperger 11,780 votes.
Jen, I want to get you in here. ProPublica reports the FBI looked at using AI technology to review and verify signatures on mail-in ballots. There's been this fixation on mail-in ballots by the administration. What more can you tell us about that reporting?
So ProPublica learned that the FBI, as we know, agents have been assigned, hundreds of agents have been assigned to Georgia to relitigate the 2020 election, which was proven through multiple audits to be fair and accurate. And now agents are in the state trying to find more evidence to fit Trump's claims. And ProPublica learned that as part of that, they're looking at the mail-in ballots, at the signatures that voters put to try to see if they're valid or not. Now, this is something that states do to validate mail-in ballots. They look at the signatures. The science on it, though, is shaky. And when you start adding AI to the process to try to determine whether someone cast a fraudulent ballot, that's when experts told us that you're going to get mistakes. It's not going to be accurate. And this all comes back to just trying to quickly appease Trump by looking back at these results that, like I said, have already been for years verified.
Let's just look at the gestalt here, the big picture at all we've been talking about. So where do you think it goes from here, Paul? I know you've warned that you think we could see ICE deployed to election facilities. What else do you think we're about to see? And what gives you evidence of that?
The number one thing that Trump's focused on is expanding and protecting his power. So whether it's Iran or Venezuela or now at home, he wants to protect his power. And the most immediate threat to his power is the midterm elections. So tonight is probably going to feel like when he made the case for war on Iran. He's going to pick a target and he's going to throw all kinds of stuff at it and hope that he can fire off enough people to stick with him. And that's what this is about. It's not about convincing the entire country. I think he does want to attack the elections. I think plan A is to use our military. He just extended the National Guard in Washington, D.C. to 2029, which is after inauguration. Plan B is to use ICE because they're more malleable. They don't have to follow the rules in the same way the military is. And I've always said plan C is the January 6th crew, the insurrectionists, his most dedicated followers who will do what he says. So I think he's going to work down that list over the next couple of months and continue to focus on one thing, free and fair elections. And I do think it's the most immediate national security threat for America.